Welcome back, everyone, into the bunker. Also, welcome to Season 3. We have a special show for you this week, which you can actually enjoy commercial-free. Before we jump into it, though, just a quick reminder, if you're experiencing paranormal activity in your home or business, or just want to reach out for help, just share your story, you can reach us by email at mailtothebunker@gmail.com. On tonight's episode, I'm going to be sitting down with the Singular Fortean Society, which is made up of Tobias Wayland, who is the head writer, has been a field investigator for MUFON, featured on Small Town Monsters, Terror in the Skies, and whose book, The Lake Michigan Mothman, we're going to be discussing tonight. And also Emily Wayland, with degrees in design and photography, not only documents their adventures and investigations, but also analyzes all photo and video evidence that's sent to them by witnessers. So let's jump right into it, shall we? Let's start with you, Tobias. What was your most profound paranormal experience, and how did that lead you to where you are today?
Probably the most powerful experience I think that I've had to date would be I was in my early 20s, and I was staying with my parents at that time. I lived with them for maybe a year in my early 20s, just kind of trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do. And I went to bed one night normally, and I woke up, and I don't know what time it was, but it must have been in the middle of the night. And I looked around my room, and this is in the suburbs. And so, there was enough ambient light coming in from the lights that are just around in the suburbs that I could make out the silhouettes of everything in my room. And so I'm looking around, so everything's where it should be. And I wasn't sure exactly why I was awake until I noticed that my perspective was off. Like there was something wrong. And then just after that, I noticed that I appeared to be floating several feet above my bed. And so I turned to my left, and I see then this figure. It looked roughly humanoid, probably the height of a normal man, frankly, and very similar to a lot of the shadow people that I had seen in my life up until then, and continue to see sometimes. And I look over, and I have this distinct feeling that I'm not supposed to be awake for this, right? It very much felt like I was interrupting something. And I look over at this thing, and, obviously I could move. I moved my head. I felt like it wasn't a great idea to move too much, though, considering the floating and the obvious interruption, right? And so I turn to my left. I look at this thing, and it reaches its hand out. And again, I'm sort of assigning motive to it. I don't really know what its motive was, but it felt comforting. It felt like, obviously I wasn't supposed to be awake for this. So it reaches its hands out in sort of this comforting fashion and places it on my chest, and I'm lowered back down to my bed, and it just vanishes. And, so I'm sort of lying there on top of my blankets and everything. I certainly hadn't fallen asleep on top of them. There really wasn't much to be done about it. So I didn't run up and wake my parents or anything. That had never really helped in the past. I assumed it wasn't going to help now, and I was fine. There was really nothing wrong with me. And so I just kind of lied there and thought about it for a little while, and then I went back to sleep. But that's the sort of event that has been, or I should say that event is sort of indicative of the type of encounters that I've had in my life. And so for me, I got started at a pretty early age, because this is pre-internet, of course. I got started at a fairly early age going to the library, and I would check out books, by Brad Steiger and John Keel, Whitley Strieber, and I would read about their experiences, and it really helped me a lot. Because I could read about people who had had similar experiences and theirs were just as weird, and they made just as little sense, and often they were just as difficult to classify. I couldn't, with any real authority, tell somebody that I've experienced a haunting or alien abduction or whatever, because the fact is, it really just depends on who's looking at it. As far as what category you want to put it in. And so reading like those authors really helped me a lot, and kind of set me on the road, I think, to wanting to do something similar. So I eventually got a degree in English from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I started volunteering with MUFON, actually before and during that process, and after a few years of investigating with MUFON, I just kind of decided I wanted to go out and do my own thing. I wasn't super satisfied sort of with the opportunities that I saw at MUFON, as far as wanting to pursue the things in which I was really interested, and so set off on my own. And it wasn't too long after that I met Emily, and we kind of figured out that we had matching skill sets, and so here we are. We came up with the Singular Fortean Society. So I'm sorry, that was probably really long-winded too. So I'm going to toss it over to Emily.
Sure. So, I was always like curious and kind of a weird, nerdy kid about this kind of stuff. I grew up in a household that was very like scientific about these kind of things, though. So, over the years, I kind of like, it was a habit to kind of shrug this kind of stuff off. But I always liked it. But I just grew up with, just kind of being like, well, it's swamp gas or whatever, and when I was 5 and I was living where we live now in Madison, my grandfather had recently passed away, and I had just gone through a difficult time in my life, breakups, whatever, 20s as we do. And I was like I was kind of like waking up kind of groggy, and I saw like a shadowy version of my grandpa, and I knew it was him because he had like his signature sweater on. I could see like his glasses. He had a cleft chin, comb over hair. So, and then, I was just kind of like waking up groggy, and he said, "It's a shame you guys couldn't get along, but you're going to be okay, honey." And then I was just kind of like, huh? And then I like went back to sleep feeling comforted. So I didn't see him leave. And, it felt so real to me at the time, but, it was that reaction. I was just like, oh, that was a dream. So, fast forward a few years, and Tobias and I had our first date, and I was able to tell him that I knew about the Paulding Light, which was something he hadn't heard of. So we kind of knew right there that the interest was there. And, the more in talking to him more, the more I learned how it was very possible this was a real visitation. And so that's kind of where I entered here. And that's, I didn't have that extensive background of going to the library, but I've kind of jumped in, and I think I'm able to give like a pretty fresh perspective being so new to it.
Wow. So I can't help seeing the parallels in each of your stories. You each chose this story that happened to each of you, where you had some sort of contact with the other side, but not a scary incident, although I'm sure those things have happened here and there, but a comforting one. And I can't help but, a flag goes up when I hear like, I just went back to sleep. How many times have you heard that?
Right.
When something super weird happens and someone just goes, oh, well, that's kind of weird. And then they just go back to sleep. When, if you had stopped and thought about how profound that was, you may have had trouble going back to sleep. But it's just strange how in both of your instances, you had this encounter with something paranormal, something, that some people would describe as scary. I mean, some people see even their own shadow sometimes, and they jump and run, So, but you guys saw this shadow or the spirit this being that to some would be scary, but it was for each of you, it was comforting. It's interesting.
Sure. So, I mean, honestly, I'm reminded immediately of, and this is because we're actually reading it for our book club this month, but Whitley Strieber talks about that in Communion, of having these nighttime visitation, like abduction experiences, and then just going back to sleep, and how it sort of defies sense. But I'll say, for me personally, I didn't always go back to sleep. When I was a kid, I was terrified to go to bed because I knew when I did, they were going to come, whatever they were, and it scared the crap out of me. And so I would do anything to avoid going to sleep. I would sleep with the covers over my head. That didn't really help much. It would seem like I have memories of like hands pressing against the blankets as I have them over my head, sort of buffeting the blanket. I mean, it's as much as we want to try to convince ourselves otherwise as children, blankets do not act as a magic shield against monsters. And so, I tried all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. I would follow our dog around at night. I would sneak out of my room because I thought that if I wasn't in my bed, then they wouldn't be able to find me, right? And so, yeah, so I would follow our dog around, and she was my best friend when I was a kid. So, like we were very close. But yeah, I would follow her around at night and just sleep on the floor with her, because then I felt safer. And it really wasn't until I was into my teens that I think that I had started to adjust. I think human beings, we are remarkably adaptable creatures, and I think we can get used to just about anything. And by the time I was into my teens, I had sort of made my peace with what was happening to me, and I knew that there were just going to be times at night where something was going to come, and I hadn't been hurt. And like I said, you can get used to about anything. And so by the time I had that experience in my early 20s, it just wasn't that surprising anymore.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, and I did read Communion. I love the book, and I love that there is the sort of psychic element to the UFO phenomenon, which I think a lot of people sort of forget about that fact in a lot of cases, and are just sold on nuts and bolts. And it's this, it's that. They're from another planet. They're here to they're investigating humans and blah blah blah, on and on and on, without real concrete proof. But at the same time, they're sort of closing their peripheral vision to this psychic element to UFO phenomenon, which, sure, there's things seen. Sure, people have seen things land. But the vast majority of sightings are these soft sightings, as Keel put it. Lights, some kind of energy. There's a psychic element to it. And I think a lot of people in the paranormal that investigate with me, I think, have that same sort of dogma about spirits and hauntings. And it's this, it's that. Oh, a traumatic event happened here, so this is connected to that and this. And, that might be the case sometimes. But we don't really have any proof as to what we're communicating with or what we're talking to. And just the other day, like I mentioned earlier, we were at Fort Mifflin. One of the kids in our group just pulled out his smartphone, snapped a picture, and captured one of the best apparition photos I've ever seen in my life. And it's the first time he's ever investigated. But we can't jump to, it's a spirit of a soldier, or it's or this or that. Maybe that is a extra dimensional being. Maybe it is an alien. Who really knows? We don't really have the proof. And that's what I like about how you guys approach this, is you approach it like actual journalists, and you report the facts, and you interview witnesses, you go to the site, you get a perspective of where and when these events happened, what it could be, what it probably was, what it couldn't be, and I really respect that about you guys. And that's really, it's needed in this field, because there are too many people jumping to this, jumping to that, and not considering all avenues or all possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that really nails, I think, what we're trying to do. Certainly, I know that when I'm writing, be it journalistically or often, even sort of the more creative nonfiction that goes into the books that we work on. There is this awareness for me of narrative, and I think something that as a writer, and why writers can be so good in this field, is that we have an understanding of story and narrative and the difference, and so we can recognize narrative. And when it comes to what we do, I try to strip the narrative away as much as possible and just leave people with the actual story. And then when we do want to speculate, we make it very, very clear that that's what we're doing, because you're absolutely right. There is just nothing at all to indicate that anyone has any expertise on what any of this is, frankly. And it is all so weird and so inexplicable in so many ways that we are very much in the infancy, I think, of trying to understand these phenomena.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And isn't it interesting that people who, and not anything against them, because I love lots of these people, most of them, and jump into this field of the unknown, and then struggle with trying to define it as this or that. It's just interesting.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, I'm not necessarily blameless, when it comes to stuff like that. I think it took me a while to get here. I think I was, well, I know I was very much a sort of nuts and bolts UFO investigator for some time, throughout my 20s at least. And it I don't even remember precisely what it was that clicked with me. I had all of these interests, sort of these seemingly disparate interests. Like, I was interested in the occult, I was interested in ghosts and hauntings, I was interested in psychic phenomena, and yet, for a long time, I kept them all in these separate boxes, and I think it really must have been I guess the first time I read Fort, which would have been in probably my late 20s, because I had already, I had read Keel, I had read all of these people that were inspired by him. And I think it was probably really when I interacted with Fort's work that I was sort of inspired to make that leap. Like, one measures a circle beginning anywhere. That made so much sense to me, and it made sense in a way that, like, Keel's ultra terrestrials didn't, because Keel's ultra terrestrials to me was just another box. Whereas Fort's like, look, all of this, whatever it is, like, we can learn something about all of it by studying any of it. So, look for those connections and speculate if you want. But the fact is, there isn't this overriding principle, this umbrella explanation that anybody has found yet, although many, many people have tried. And so, Fort's sort of whimsical speculations, I think, are what really stuck with me, because they were so devoid of this strong narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the field needs that as well as the concrete fact collecting and journalism that you and others like you are doing, because you can, if you just follow the woo woo, as Keel said, to quote him again, this stuff can lead you into the middle of nowhere, sitting on top of a mountain, waiting forever for nothing to happen, basically, because there is really, just when you think, I've had this conversation countless times with so many researchers and investigators, just when you think you have this figured out, all of a sudden, boom, here comes the curveball, and then you're left back at square one. Okay, yeah, and then you have to go back and admit, all right, yeah, that's right, I forgot. We have no idea what we're talking about. And like you said, I've been guilty of it too, thinking that I've had certain things figured out, and we're always just smacked back in place by the next thing that happens or the next report that comes in, because there are some people that I talk to that believe that is a feature of the phenomenon itself, that it's conscious in a way, and it does not want to be figured out, and so it's doing that on purpose. It's leading us down a path for a little ways, letting us think it knows what's going on, so they can just like drop us off a cliff and bring us back to square one again.
Right.
Something to that, I think. But
yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there certainly appears to be a level of obfuscation that exists in these phenomena, and whatever connections we can make, if they're to be meaningful, I think that they have to exist outside of the narrative provided by any particular phenomenon. Like, for instance, you could use contactees as I think a pretty good example of this. So you're going about your business, and you're picked up and abducted into some UFO, and then told a bunch of, what seems on the surface to be total nonsense. And like, you're just going to take their word for that, and that's what we're supposed to build our understanding of these phenomena, like, off of. I know, like, why, I don't know why you would just take them at their word. That it's baffling to me. And so I think if we're going to understand any part of this, it's going to be by making our own connections. It's not going to be taking like the other's word for anything, because the other has really shown itself, whatever it is, to be deceptive. And you're right. It's like, that way lies madness. That's how you go about chasing your tail until you end up a bitter, angry old man, like yelling at people on the internet because they've gone past your pet theories. And I don't want to be that guy.
Oh man, so true. Yeah. You have to, it's almost like the stories of, astral projection. You got that silver cord, if you lose that cord and you just keep drifting and drifting, you're gone. Like, that's it. You're going to be the guy standing on the soapbox with his, bottle of whiskey in a paper bag and his dirty trench coat, screaming at everybody. And at that point, no one's going to take you seriously.
Absolutely.
Oh man. So we have to get to the Mothman. So,
oh yeah,
I'm sure a lot of my listeners know that, know about the Mothman. 1966, 67. He starts showing up in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and around that area. Some people theorize it was, some kind of malevolent spirit. Some say it was an omen of the tragedy of the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Silver Bridge collapses. Some lives are lost. It's a tragedy. And then the Mothman disappears and is gone. Am I right?
After the Silver Bridge, I don't think so. actually, and
It's not common knowledge, though, really.
right. Well, the thing is, oh boy, and this is why I focus so much on narrative. Like Keel he was such an entertaining writer, but he never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And so if you like using the Mothman prophecies as an example, you can see sort of the influence that he, as an unreliable narrator, had on that story into like crafting it as this sort of disaster narrative. There's literally nothing tying the Silver Bridge disaster to any of the sightings. None of the weird messages that he had claimed to receive or that others had claimed to receive really pointed to that. And it was really only as a sort of, and I hesitate to use this word because it was a huge disaster, but as a convenient narrative ending for his book that I think it's connected to it at all, frankly. And so, to my knowledge, even in that area, although I will say I'm not an expert on Mothman sightings in the Ohio River Valley, but from looking at some of the work of people who have, really investigated that area, the flying humanoid sightings never really stopped out there. They continued and persist to this day, honestly. And they seem to be happening in other parts of the country as well. I mean, notably for us in our neck of the woods, for whatever reason, around Lake Michigan, and every state surrounding that Great Lake, and people ask me if there's something special about Lake Michigan, and I don't know. I mean, honestly, like as far as I'm concerned, it's a convenient geographic landmark. It seems like the sightings that we're receiving are coming within a couple 100-mile radius of Lake Michigan for whatever reason. If maybe that means there's something about Lake Michigan. Maybe it's a total coincidence. But I mean, that's what we've seen so far.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, yeah, I'm glad I read your book because I was also under the assumption that sort of, at the end of Keel's story, it sort of, maybe it was seen here and there, but really the story ended there. And that probably is, a lot of credit to his storytelling, like you said earlier, but that is not the case. And I was struck by some of these accounts in your book. I mean, let's start with what basically this thing looks like. I mean, it sounds like all the reports that I read in the book are all roughly similar. And so let's just start there. I mean, what are people seeing out there, and like under what circumstances are they showing up? I mean, are there any consistencies between the witnesses themselves tying them together? Is it the region? Is it, the time of year? Is it it's not the 37th parallel, obviously, but is there some other geological feature that is causing people to see this? I mean, is it something that's physically there, or is it something there that's causing the people to see something?
Sure. Well, as far as any correlations of timing or anything like that, I mean, I would say that just looking at our timeline, most of the sightings, took place between like spring and summer and into fall. You would see some over winter, although, again, they're not as common as the warm months. And that could be for a couple of reasons. People aren't as active outside here, when it's not warm out, obviously. I mean, it gets to like negative 60 certain days of our winters. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's not great. Like we get polar vortexes down here and oh God. So, I mean, and maybe that played some part in it. It could be too, that those numbers are inflated by misidentifications of mundane animals during that time. There are a lot of like great blue herons, cranes, things like that moving through this area, especially in like the spring, as they migrate. And so, and honestly, climate change has sort of played havoc with their environment and sort of their migratory habits. So what you'll see up here now is you'll see like cranes and herons coming up sooner and staying longer. They'll overwinter at times. Any place that has fresh water that isn't frozen, they'll overwinter at. I've seen heron tracks in the snow up here in February, which
pretty wild.
It is wild because it's not technically supposed to happen, or at least not supposed to happen as often as it is now.
I mean, when I was growing up, we lived by like a marsh where there's always great blue herons, and they were never there in the winter.
No, but they are now. So that could be part of it. I mean, certainly some of these sightings, I am confident, are misidentifications of likely a great blue heron, which fans of the Mothman are not going to like a giant bird as an explanation, even for some of those sightings after the debacle that was the Sandhill crane explanation for the 66 and 67 sightings. There's a lot of good, there's some hard evidence and a decent amount of circumstantial evidence to point towards misidentifications being an explanation for some of the sightings. Definitely not all of them. There's plenty of weird ones in there too. It's just, if we aren't doing our due diligence and we're not accurately reporting a mundane explanation for something, then I mean, how can we expect people to believe us when we're trying to tell them that, hey, this other thing might actually be something really weird. And so, to that end, we kind of came up with sort of two separate profiles. In the one profile, you had people who saw something in the sky that they couldn't immediately identify, that was usually pretty far away. Those sightings often took place during the daytime, and there was no none of the associated paranormal phenomena with those sightings. So, people didn't necessarily report the abject fear or any sort of psychic connection or any later paranormal phenomena, like any sort of haunting phenomena, which will sometimes happen to witnesses after they've seen Mothman, or really a lot of different strange things. And so that profile, I think, describes what is likely misidentifications. And there's one case in particular that I was able to use to really sort of drive that point home. So in May of 2018, a young man was bicycling to work in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. And as he was bicycling to work, he saw that this couple on the street corner was looking at something in the sky. And he looks up and he sees what he later described to me as either a giant bat or a man in a wingsuit. And he's got a GoPro camera on his bicycle helmet, luckily. And so he decides he's going to follow this thing around, and he's going to try to get as much good footage of it as he can. So, he can try to figure out what the hell this giant bat was, right? And he does a great job of it. And he was very, very forthcoming with everything he had found. He even sent us the SD card with the original footage on it, and so long story short, we managed to get, with his help, a couple of good stills out of this video that really show what he had seen. And it's a bird. I'm sorry. It's absolutely a bird. Yeah. From its profile, it looks like it was probably a great blue heron. And so great blue herons, for anybody who isn't familiar, are, they're often described as flying dinosaurs because that's basically what they are. And, from a certain angle, when they're backlit, I think somebody could be forgiven for, misidentifying them as a giant bat or a pterosaur or something. And so I think that's certainly what happened here, because this guy, he wasn't lying to me. He absolutely was not. He wasn't trying to hide anything. He really thought he had seen something that was extraordinary. And so based on that, and then using some of the descriptions from other witnesses, who again really didn't seem to get like a great look at this thing, it seemed like we were able to build this profile of what looked like some misidentifications. And so, just using like a rough count, I would say that probably accounts for somewhere around 40% of the sightings around Lake Michigan, specifically in like the Chicago area, especially. But that still leaves a lot that are mysterious, and so the other profile that we ended up with was sightings that definitely couldn't be, if you believe the witness testimony. And we always we proceed under the assumption that what the witness is telling us is correct, unless we have hard evidence to discount that testimony. So this other profile is if you believe the witness testimony, couldn't possibly be a misidentified bird, because what people were describing was a winged humanoid, seen within relatively close proximity to themselves, often on the ground, standing up. And if not that, then at relatively low altitude flying. And they would describe this thing that was, 7 or 8 feet tall, with a 15-foot wingspan, and often glowing red eyes. And other descriptors sort of matched or were similar to what you would see in the 66 to 67 sightings, where some people would talk about like bird-like qualities, as far as like the wings are concerned. Quite a few people mentioned bat-like wings, and there was some of that sort of variation decades ago in the Point Pleasant sightings as well. And so I always just kind of chalk that up as like the natural variance that you would see just in eyewitness testimony. If you get 10 people to describe the same object to you, they're all going to describe it just a little bit differently. And if it's something that they saw for less than 10 seconds at night, I think that gets pretty understandable. But these sightings, also were sort of marked by this extra layer of paranormality, if you will, where people would talk about feeling this unreasonable fear. Sometimes people would talk about being afraid before they even knew they were alone. Like they would feel the fear first, and then. Yeah, and then they would see this thing. They would notice that this thing was there. People would describe the creature, vanishing into thin air. Some people would even talk about feeling like sort of a palpable sense of evil. I've had other witnesses, who have described weird, like haunting phenomena after their sightings, or sometimes before, during, and after their sightings. So you'll have people, who have talked about, we had one lady out in Maryland talk about how her radio kept turning itself on after she and her son had this sighting of a flying humanoid out there. Here in Madison, I talked to a woman who said that her family experienced like haunting phenomena around the time that her mother had a sighting of this black flying creature with red eyes, and how they would hear a baby crying that nobody could find or identify. They would hear like all of their cabinets like slamming, and it sounded like all of their dishes like, being broken, and then they would run out, and they're just and there was nothing. And so a misidentified bird isn't going to do that. And so yeah, I think that's, for me, definitely like the other profile, the profile B of paranormal flying humanoid sightings.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's one of the things in the book that struck me, was because I've experienced this myself when I've witnessed paranormal events or witnessed spirits or shadow people or whatever you want to call them. And that is having a completely uncharacteristic reaction to the event itself. I actually on the very first episode of this podcast, I traveled up to North Bergen, New Jersey, to follow in the footsteps of the Stonehenge incident. And I investigated the sightings back in the 1970s. That was investigated by Bud Hopkins. This gentleman was, I got the original case report and read through it, took notes. I Google Earthed it. I was looking at it, and I said, I just need to go up there. And I took Beth with me, and I said, she wasn't too thrilled about it, but I said, we're going to go investigate a UFO. And she's like, okay. So I get the case report and all my notes, and I get some devices, and I jump in the car. I drive up there, and lo and behold, I trace the exact same route that the main witness drove the night he saw this craft land in this baseball field. And wouldn't you know, at the exact spot back in 1975 where this gentleman had his radio go out, even before this craft was seen, wouldn't you know, in the exact same spot, my radio and GPS and everything went completely haywire. And I took some readings. There was no anomalous EMF readings or RF signal or anything. I couldn't figure it out. Later on in the day, I'm taking a break. I'm sitting in this nice, beautiful park, and people are walking their dogs, and we're sitting under this nice willow tree and just enjoying the breeze, just cooling off. And this, and people are walking by and walking their dogs, and we're greeting them as they go by and petting their dogs and stuff. And then this gentleman walks down and approaches Beth and myself, walks past her, walks right up to me, stops right in front of me, turns and begins sniffing me like an animal. And it's since been known as the Sniffing Man incident. But what was interesting about that was my reaction to it. And anyone that knows me would say, well, what did you say? And the answer is, I said absolutely nothing. I was completely struck dumb by this event. The whole entire time this gentleman is sniffing me, I'm standing there. I'm not reacting. I'm not saying anything. I'm not moving. I can't take my eyes off of him. Beth, too, her eyes are locked on him. She's not saying anything. Neither one of us are getting up. We're not laughing. We're not saying, hey, what the F is wrong with you? Hey, get out of here. Like, hey, oh, you want crack? All the normal reactions I would have in a situation like that were gone. And I was transfixed. And he sniffed me for maybe, I'm not even really sure how long, 10 to 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. All the while, we're just sitting there staring at him. He finishes what he's doing, and he turns and walks away. And each of us, again, eyes locked on this guy as he walked just casually away for, probably maybe 2 minutes before he turns this corner and moves out of sight. In the instant that he left our sight, we snapped out of it. Just like that. And then finally looked at each other and went, what the hell just happened? And then we could finally have a normal reaction. And so I can relate to some of these reports that you're receiving, where how these people are just either struck with terror before they even know anything's happening, or they're, they have a camera in their hand, but they don't use it because they're just struck numb. I relate to that so much because I've experienced it firsthand. And so that's one thing that struck me is the effect that some of these sightings had on the people. And the fact that, as you described it, being struck with terror before you even realize that there's anything to be afraid of, like that to me says that is something paranormal. That is something beyond explanation.
Oh yeah.
Place.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree with that, honestly. And I like to tell people, I can't even get my phone out in time to take a picture of the dog when he's doing something cute,
Totally.
Like, and that's under ideal circumstances. So, yeah, I mean, being struck with terror in the middle of the night by a monster when you're not expecting one. Yeah, of course, people. I mean, even if they did, go ahead and go outside and try to take a picture of a bird or a bat or something flying at night with your cell phone camera, and let me know how that goes for you.
Right,
because it's not going to be great.
It's hard.
Right, it is.
And you need really, especially things at night. You need special equipment. You need,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know more about this than most people. I
don't even have a proper 600 millimeter lens to get a good close up shot of these things. So most people don't,
Right. Well, I mean, and I think you've told me this before too, Emily. Cell phone cameras they're made for selfies. They're not made for taking high quality photographs of quickly moving objects.
You can't manipulate the settings to, it's, if you're out at night, it's automatic. The camera's automatically going to adjust the best way it knows how with what it's been programmed with to get the shot. You can't control how fast the shutter goes down. You can't control how much light you let in. You can't, they're not ideal for that kind of thing.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's really never been any sort of surprise to us, that people aren't out there taking better photographs. And really the Pilsen witness, for instance, it was during the day, and the fact is it wasn't anything paranormal, and that's probably why he was able to follow it around and get so much, good high quality video footage of it. But yeah, and it really is startling to see people's reactions and how these events stay with them over time. I know that in popular culture, cryptids, people love their sexy Mothman statue, and well, it's true, and they like to make these things into jokes, but by the time you've spoken to your 30th witness who is terrified and they can't even tell their own family about it because the first time they tried, they were laughed at. And so they haven't talked about their experience again until they manage to find you, that rare person who will actually take them seriously and not mock them for what was frankly a traumatic experience in a lot of instances. That's powerful. And it's something, it really stays with people. And I can tell you, as a result of investigating the Lake Michigan Mothman, it's something that's definitely stayed with me. I mean, I know Emily and I both, having had the opportunity to meet with people and have them be gracious enough to take us around their sighting area and describe in detail their experiences, and in broad daylight, seeing the fear on a grown man's face as he's telling you about this experience, and just watching him literally sweat as he's relating this experience to two other adults. It's not normal, and honestly, it's not super funny. It's moving, and I don't think a lot of people understand that, and it's certainly something we try to portray in our work, I think, and in how seriously we take it. Like, look, I mean, I don't hate fun. I love fun as much as anybody, and I understand that on like a certain level, um, by making or by presenting things sort of in a way that is entertaining, then we can do a service to these witnesses and get their stories out there. I just, and I'm totally digressing right now, but yeah, I mean, like we want to make sure that we're not, that we're never mocking, I guess, or portraying even the phenomena in a lot of ways as a joke. You know what I mean? Like this has a really strong effect on people's lives. Something just reminded me of that today, which is probably why it's fresh on my mind. But yeah, I think we see so much of that now.
Oh yeah.
With people, like literally, and I wish I was making this up, but like literally people talking about or like coming up with, like cartoons of like a provocative Mothman or Bigfoot or something. Yeah, it's not my favorite thing in the world. So
yeah, that's so true, and we see that a lot too with dealing with primarily hauntings.
Sure,
it's that same phenomenon in the sense that people come to us because and this is how we were trained. I mean, I remember them telling us this on the first day of training years ago, is that like, look, these people have nowhere to go. They can't call the fire department. They can't call the police. They can, I mean, sometimes police are called if someone believes there's an intruder, which happens a lot. But once the police are dispatched and they find no one in the house and there's no forced entry, no evidence that anyone was ever there, now you're left with something that you can't explain. And now who do you call? Well, you call people like us who, we joke around amongst ourselves. Like we go to public events and we do, investigations with just investigators to go out and just kind of hone our craft and practice using our equipment and just seeing what we experience. And sure, we can speculate amongst ourselves about what that voice was, or wow, that was a direct response to that question. What could that mean? And we can speculate amongst ourselves and have some fun with that. But it's never in a mocking sense, and we're never, while we're investigating, mocking or provoking or being disrespectful in any way to the space or what may or may not be there. And especially not to the clients, because like I said, they have nowhere else to go. They're dealing with something that they can't even explain. Like you said, they can't even explain it to their families a lot of the times. And, it's especially troubling when you're dealing with a parent who feels that they are incapable of protecting their kids or their dogs, animals, or pets, or both, or their employees, because they're feeling completely out of control and terrified because there's something going on inside their space and they have no idea what it is or how to deal with it. And that's why people like the Singular Fortean Society are so important, because like you said at the very outset of this podcast, it was reading other people and realizing that you weren't alone and there are other people out there going through this. That's really what helped you take that next step and decide, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to help people because this helped me, and I think that's the greatest respect you can show to a study or a topic or a phenomenon.
Well, it's sort of like imitation as flattery at that point. And I did want to mention as well, I mean, what you're saying is absolutely true when it comes to experiencers of like haunting phenomena. I mean, because we don't just do obviously like just Mothman or cryptids or UFOs or whatever. I've probably got at least 3 or 4 emails in our inbox right now, and they're all from people who are experiencing hauntings. And I'm not kidding when I say the subject line of those emails in every single one, it is some form of "please help me."
Yeah.
So, and
it's absolutely right. Yeah,
it's powerful stuff. It really, really is.
Yeah, and I think that the open mind that you guys have is is especially helpful in this case or with this phenomena, because you may be called to a haunting, and the next thing you know, you're on a UFO case, or vice versa. That's happened to us.
Sure.
Where we went into, investigate this woman's house who was terrified. She was having all kinds of issues in her marriage. Her life was not in a good place. And she was, we believe, and, after we gave her prescription on how to deal with this, seems to have helped. She was, because of the negative things going on in her life, she was kind of feeding this phenomenon. There was definitely activity going on there before, but because of her negative place that she was at in her life, like, she was actually feeding this thing, and it became something pretty terrifying. But lo and behold, she's also seeing UFOs, and her mother is seeing UFOs. And, and I think back to a story that my sisters just recently told me, and I wanted to strangle them for not telling me this years ago, but they, when I was I may have not even been born yet, or I was a baby. I was too small to remember anyway. They experienced a UFO. They were chased by a UFO down my street. They flew into the driveway, ran inside in a panic. And my parents and my brother were there. Both witnessed this bright light fly over the house. My father ran outside the back door. He was stationed in White Sands in the early 1950s. So he's seen some stuff. He runs out there. He witnesses it. But also before, and during that, lo and behold, there's paranormal activity in the house. The rocking chair in the living room would move. That is until my father smashed it up and burned it. The pool balls on the pool table downstairs moving around, and like someone was playing when there was no one down there. All kinds of poltergeist kind of activity, again tied to UFOs, and it's all this stuff is connected in some way. And it's only that open mind that is really going to help us down the road to figuring out how this is connected, why it's connected. And like you said, we're only in its infancy at best right now. And it's that open mind and its journalistic approach to this that is going to get us down the road, and not dogma, not disbelieving everything and not believing everything. And you guys are, I think, riding that line in between those two extremes, and that's fantastic. And that's exactly what this phenomenon needs right now.
Well, thank you. And I obviously couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So what is next on the horizon for Singular Fortean Society? I mean, do you guys have, any projects coming out? I mean, I know you do all kinds of awesome stuff on your website with book club, and constantly updating us on, your investigations and your findings and stuff like that. What's coming up down the road for you guys?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm currently working on Strange Tales of the Impossible. So that's going to be our next book coming out. We really want to get that out before Haunted America. So the Haunted America conference, it's one of our favorite conferences. We go every year. I'll be speaking at it this year. It's in Alton, Illinois, and it's put on by Troy Taylor and his wife, Lisa, who are fantastic people, and they have a great community down there. And so we'd really like to get the book out prior to that conference. And I think everything's sort of on track for that to happen. So hopefully we'll have Strange Tales of the Impossible out for purchase in July. And then we do have, other exciting things coming up. We are slated to film On the Trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman at the end of May with Small Town Monsters. I don't know a release date for that, but I would imagine it'll be over the summer. Obviously, we'll let people know as soon as we do, when that's likely to be coming out. And, we always have stuff that we're working on as far as like the Singular Fortean Society and our members through Patreon. So if anybody who's listening is interested in being a part of what we do, you can always check us out at patreon.com/Singular Fortean. We do have a variety of activities and investigations that we do through there, because we really sort of want to try to build a real Fortean community. And so, we'd have some live investigations and investigation videos, and we like to, record like member exclusive podcasts. And we also have our book club, which you mentioned, which is relatively new, but I love, because I can talk about books indefinitely. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of fun. One of the things that we just added with the book club too is a monthly watch party. So like we're reading Communion right now, and we like to split the book up into 2 separate months. So you can talk, like we'll talk about the first half of the book at the end of this month. And so for this month's watch party, like we don't want to watch Communion. We'll save that for next month. So we'll watch like The Fourth Kind, which is an abduction scenario movie that I think borrows some from Communion, but like more than that, I think it's just interesting, sort of through the lens of abduction lore in general. So just doing stuff like that as a community, like discussing it and having a lot of fun doing it, is sort of what we have going on from that angle. Am I forgetting anything, Emily?
I mean, I think you summed it up right there. I think we're just mostly looking back to, getting back to our conferences and events and stuff that we love to do.
Right.
Because obviously 2020 put kind of a damper on that. We were able to pivot, but, we really missed the community.
Absolutely. Well said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, things are beginning to open up here too. And it's nice. And we can see some events coming up, and we've already had 2 major investigations in the last week. Just private ones for us, but another private one just popped up today. So things are happening again. So it's good to see, and it's the community, like you said, that's just fantastic. Just missing everybody, and all the people you get together with at these events and share notes with and stuff. So I think, one thing that 2020 has taught us is that, is to appreciate the things that we can do, because, sometimes life gets in the way and prevents us from doing the things we always want to do. So I think gratitude is a huge lesson for the past year. And just in closing, I just wanted to give a shout out to Timothy Renner, who is going through some health issues right now, of the Strange Familiars podcast, which I enjoy a great deal every week. So he's having some health issues, and so just keep him in your prayers, everybody. But again, gratitude, I think, is going to be the message of 2021, and especially once we start getting out there and getting to these events, like you said, and really sinking our teeth back into this phenomenon in these cases again. So I want to thank you two for coming on. It was an honor. I will link your Patreon page and your website also to the episode page, and I urge everybody to check out your website if you're interested in anything paranormal and you're looking for a serious approach to it, in a serious treatment of the topic. Definitely check out singularfortean.com. It's fantastic. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for your time, and I wish you both well.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having us. This is always a great time.
Take care.
All right. Thanks. You too.
Well, there you have it, folks. Season 3, Episode 1 in the books. I want to thank you all for joining us on this crazy journey. And I urge you, if you heard this episode, to reach out to the Singular Fortean Society at singularfortean.com. I'll put links on the episode page, and I also highly recommend their book, The Lake Michigan Mothman. Fantastic read, and a real journalistic approach to the world of the paranormal. The bunker has some great investigations coming up, a couple being Greystone Manor in upstate New York, as well as Hillview Manor out in Pennsylvania. We look forward to sharing our evidence and our experiences with you all. Again, thank you for joining us. Cheers, everyone.